From Wall Street to managing hundreds of millions in client money, Nick and I use our alphabet soup of credentials to discuss the investing and tax strategies that actually work. Oh, and we played Division I college football together, so strap in. This one hits hard. Let's go.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Life Goal Playbook. This week, we're going to be discussing something that I think that's in the headlines and that a lot of folks around the country are discussing, which is college still worth it? Is there still return on investment of higher education? Looking at across the country, college costs are headline news, and families everywhere are asking that tough question. Are we going to be sending our kids to school, and is the price tag that we're paying still worth it?
Okay. So first off, I don't think that anybody has been more fortunate than Nick and I as it relates to college, right? We have been extremely fortunate and blessed with what has been given to us, and we can hang a lot of that thanks and appreciation on athletics. But Nick and I both did an undergrad at Iona, and then we also actually both ended up getting free MBAs out of Iona University, and that was because Nick played baseball and because I played football. It happened to work as a graduate assistant. So as we come into this, know that we're coming into this as huge advocates of education. We would not be in the situation we're in today if we weren't spoiled and lucky with the education opportunity that was presented in front of us. So what kind of teased this? What brought us to have this podcast this week? And I personally have 3 kids under 5 years old. So obviously at this point, I'm about an absolute expert when it comes to parenting, right? Kidding. No, honestly, thinking about it and talking with clients on a daily basis, if you have kids that are, in their teens, in their late teens, and they're getting ready to make the decision on what college to go to and what major to focus on, that is an incredibly daunting task right now. The AI build out that's going on right now appears to be changing the landscape. So if we look back at the last 30 years, computer engineering, right, coders, they have had an incredible career path. They have made an ungodly amount of money. We have lots of them as clients. And that is a completely new landscape now, right? You now have AI that's able to write the code and do a lot of heavy lifting that came from these engineers. So that landscape has completely changed. So, I don't know, I'm obviously not an expert in that field, but I don't know if it makes sense to go down that career path or not. Another one that's a perfect example that's been a staple is the accounting, the practice of accounting, right? Filing taxes for people. So that's something that, was like a top 4 or 5 career path for many people over the years. And right now, if you look at H&R stock, right? H&R stock is one of the big publicly traded ways to get your taxes done. If you look at the H&R block, if you look at H&R block and look at their stock price, it's been cut in half over the last year. AI is coming in on that, right? There's no doubt that AI is going to change the landscape as it relates to how you're going to file your taxes. So is that a career path that now makes sense? So we just see this. We start asking questions, and then you feel that you need to have a conversation like this to flesh out the pros and cons and make sure that everybody is doing the due diligence that's needed when it comes to making these very, very important financial decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And all this change and uncertainty in regards to AI is coming into a sector that is the price is already greatly inflated, right? I mean, we're looking back over the last 20, 30 years from the time that we were in school, and it's almost doubled since then. And there are some underlying structural problems with the system, how it's financed, that have led to that. We're not going to get into all those today because I don't think we have the political pull to change any of those. But the situation is what it is, and looking at the numbers, I think we should go through today a little bit and cover whether we think college is still worth it or not, how parents can plan ahead, come up with a game plan for financing that. And then if you've already got student loan debt out there, which many, many Americans do, there's what, $8.3 trillion worth of student loan debt out on the market right now. How do you handle that? What's the best debt strategy in managing your finance with that? So I think those will be the big 3 segments that we'll cover here today. I mean, Brett, was there anything else that you wanted to add on that before we start getting into the
Yeah.
cost and yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. So there's one other thing that's really important that is hard to put a dollar value on. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what the value is. So going outside the numbers, I think one of the most important things that kids take away from college is kind of learning to be an adult, right? It's like an adulting opportunity with training wheels. So you're going to go out into the world, you're going to be uncomfortable, the environment is completely new. That is incredibly important as it goes from transitioning from high school into being a proper adult that's got to stand on your own. You're going to learn how to date. You're going to learn how to drink alcohol, right? You're going to learn how to make all these different mistakes, and you're going to learn how to manage risk, right, for yourself along the way. And you're also probably going to have some of your own financial decisions to make in there too, because you're going to have to balance a budget and pay for food and all the things that come along the way. So that is incredibly important. Right. And also the social aspect of it. Your social network is also going to be really important. They say it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, guess what? A lot of that comes from college, right? Outside of the social network that you have from high school. So it's hard for us to put a dollar value on what that's worth. It's definitely worth something. And that's hard to factor into the decisions. But let's go right into the numbers, Nick.
All right. So let's get into the cost of college and start beginning to build a framework on how we're going to measure return of investment of higher education. You really got to get down to breaking down the true cost when you are looking at the cost of tuition. It's obviously there's multiple factors. There's tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, and then all the living expenses that come with that. So I think you really need to take a look at what the differences are going to be from being at an in-state school, going out of state, a private university, doing 2 years of community college, and kind of finding the right combination at a price point that makes sense to you. The spread can be enormous from those differences. My brother, for example, wasn't sure what he wanted to study. He did 2 years of community college for peanuts, and then was able to go on to Notre Dame to complete his 4-year education. But once he knew exactly what he wanted to do, so I think that was a smart financial decision. That I think some people should consider. I've got friends who went to out of state schools because they wanted to watch Alabama football games every weekend and pay out of state tuition for that. That might have worked 20 years ago when the price was half as much, but now that the flexibility, the optionality to do that is the cost calculus is way different now. But from an investment lens, Brett, how should families be thinking about this?
Yeah, you can watch Alabama football from upstate New York, too. I do it on most Saturdays in the fall. So I think people need to get dialed in on the numbers, right? You need to get dialed in on the numbers, write them down, build a game plan as a family. And if you think that you want to, encourage your kids to go to school, then start early, start saving early if you can afford to do so, and then be ready to call an audible late in the game if it makes, if you think it makes sense for your family, right? So as Peyton Manning says, Omaha, right? So what do we mean by calling an audible? So if your kid is 17, 18 years old and we're kind of, hemming and hawing about, what should we essentially force the kid into college to study, we're probably trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It might not make sense to force the kid into school, right? The kid may not be a great fit for school and may be a better fit for starting, some type of small business, right? And there's a lot of businesses out there that can be started that would be, fall under the blue collar umbrella, potentially, whether it's an HVAC business, a plumbing business, building homes. We have clients across the country that are worth millions and make millions a year that do all these things. There's actually a gentleman here in town that's selling one of the businesses I just labeled for nearly $20 million, and it's a blue-collar business. That may be where the opportunity is, right? Because it's going to be tough for AI to steal, a plumbing job or an HVAC job, right? So if your kid isn't perfectly well suited to go off to school and dive into an engineering degree or some type of math degree or a business degree, just because that's not them, that's not their personality, don't force it, right? Slow play it, and then we can look at some of the other options that are out there. So Nick, as we go back to discussing the lifetime earnings, if you don't mind, why don't we tee up some of the high numbers on some of the situations or some of the opportunities that we've seen historically, and then what that might relate to in today's numbers?
Yeah, and that's the other side. This is the return component of the investment, right? Typically, if you go back over time, people who hold a bachelor's degree or higher earn a median of about $1.2 million more over the course of their career than high school grads. But that return on investment varies vastly by the major and the institution that you go to. Not all degrees are created equally. If you're looking at the average debt at graduation, again, for most people out there, just on average student loan balance is about $30,000. But looking at majors and which ones have had the highest return on investment, it's been things like engineering, nursing and health, and business degrees, finance, accounting have typically had the highest ROI. Not surprisingly, majors like fine arts and actually education has one of the lowest return on investment out there. So, not only choosing the right university for you and being very conscious of the cost, but it's making sure that you're selecting a field that is going to have the opportunity to pay that back in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, I've got a personal story there. Taylor and I's mother was a math professor. She's pretty decent with numbers. And Taylor and I both wanted to go to school for business. Okay, I'm the oldest. Then our sister's between us, and then Taylor's the youngest. So I went to school for business, and I went to a private school outside of New York City called Iona. Right, and it wasn't the most expensive by any means, and I was able to get some scholarships and things like that. But our mother had enough foresight to know that coming out of business school, decent odds you could probably make some money. Our sister wanted to be a teacher, and she is a teacher to this day. But my mother and father knew that, you don't want to go into an incredible amount of debt if you're going to come out. At that point in time when my sister came out of school, she was probably looking to make, maybe $35,000, $40,000 a year as a teacher. The numbers don't make sense. So she went to one of the state universities, right, which is a great school. There's lots of, of great state colleges out there, but that's an example of saying, hey, private school costs 2x state school. If we're going to make a job, if we're going to have a job that has, limited upside on the income side, let's lean towards the state school where we don't have to bury ourselves in debt in order to come out the other side. So, kind of going through some of the high level. So just on the number of years it takes to pay yourself back on the return on investment with the underlying categories. So engineering, and this is software engineering is the primary here, which we just talked about, which this is backward looking data. So it may no longer be exactly the case forward looking, but about 6.5 years to pay for the debt that you would have come out of college with. Nursing and health, 9 years, but that is very low floor, right? They've high conviction that you're going to be able to come out of either a nurse practitioner, into the medical field and be able to get a job and make, very consistent, very attractive money. Business school is 8 years. Be able to have a return on investment there. The fine arts, plus 20 years, right? Plus 20 years. So you need to be absolutely sure that makes sense. Or, press pause on that one. And then education. And education, if you're going to go into a lot of debt, doesn't make sense either. But there's decent odds that you can get a job. It's pretty predictable that you can come out and find yourself a job in the education field in one way or another. Obviously, that's incredibly important to society. So, as we take a look at things here, just trying to have an understanding as to what may make sense from making a decision on a career path and the amount of debt you want to go into. We think that as a team here, Nick and I and Taylor, as we were discussing this before doing the podcast, we think that if your child does not have high conviction into going into one particular sector or subsector that you have a lot of confidence in, go with a broad education and then slow down on the spending, right? Don't go to the most expensive school. Essentially de-risk the situation, right? Get diversified and don't spend a lot, right? That would be de-risking the situation. So, Nick, tossing it over to you. What does the job market look like for those graduating right now?
And I think this is a really difficult part for parents, right? Is when you're having this conversation. Hey, man, my buddy has his heart set on Bama. He wants to roll Tide, but the numbers don't really necessarily compute to someone who hasn't lived in the real world yet, right? So I think this is a difficult part of the conversation. I think it's something you need to be transparent and honest about. When you're looking out at the just recent grads and the employment data there, we're seeing a recent grad unemployment rate of almost 6% versus the national average, which is about 4.3 right now. There's a lot of stories out there. I think some of them are a little sensationalized that no one's hiring anyone out of school. They're just using AI. But there is some of that, right? And there's definitely an excuse for CEOs who've been on quarterly calls talking about how we've updated our business with AI to show that, and then meanwhile dump more work on their existing employees. Whether that AI is actually doing the work or the other employees are, we're not really sure yet. Time will tell. But there is a bit of a slowdown in that part of the market right now. And then I think, looking at students, generally speaking, they don't necessarily do the math on what they're actually going to be making when they come out of school properly. A couple studies came out, one from ZipRecruiter, another one from Forbes, but the average Gen Z student overestimates their starting salary by 64%. They were quoted as estimating their starting salary would be over $100,000, when in reality it was much closer to $50,000. So the math, the simple math of like, well, hey, I have $40,000 in student loans, but I'm gonna be making $100 a year. They're not factoring in the cost of living, the taxes that they're going to be paying, even if it was the 100, and how much they have actually net to pay off that loan. They think the payback time period is going to be a lot quicker than it is. So I think for this one is very simple. You can do this online. You can call me. I'll send you the amortization table I'm looking at right now. But put this in front of your kid. Everyone who has a mortgage, you've seen these whenever you go to buy your house, and it's a little intimidating, and you're like, holy cow, I can't believe that I'm going to be paying this much money in interest, and it's actually this is how long it's going to take me back. But just on some very simple assumptions, $30,000 loan, it's 6.5%. If you want to pay this back in 10 years, your monthly payment's going to be about $340. Over those 10 years, you're going to have paid over almost $11,000 in interest, and that's if you're paying that back in that time frame. A lot of student loans end up being held a lot longer than that, and a lot of people actually defer payments. Now that may seem like a great idea. I've got low income. I don't want to make that full $340 payment, but deferring payments for 2 years adds more than $4,000 of interest to that $30,000 loan. So you kind of see how people get caught into this trap by not paying the full amount, making deferments, and these things kind of build and snowball on folks. And so I think that you need to have I think visually it helps to put this in front of a student if there's some pushback as to, I want to go to this private university, this more expensive option, even though that maybe there's not quite a necessity to do so for the major or career path that they're looking to pursue. And I think looking at the numbers and having a realistic expectations about what you're going to be earning when you come out of school, what the job market is actually like, and here's how long this is going to be kind of over your head is a useful thing. It's some tough love for a parent to give to a kid, but you want to make sure that they're making this decision and they're being serious about it and understand the financial ramifications to themselves and potentially to you as the parent there. So I think that's something that I would be doing. It's some tough love, but I think will pay dividends in the future if you can make the right choice.
Yeah,
on that front.
I think for the folks that are coming out of school right now, they think that they got a little bit of a raw deal, but it's just a tough situation right now. You're essentially the U.S. economy it's doing fairly well, but it's almost as like there's a rolling recession going on while the stock market's at all-time highs, and it has to do with that K-shaped economy. But they come out, they've got $40,000 in debt at an interest rate of 6 to 7%. And that is daunting, man. That is daunting. So when you're having these conversations with your 17, 18-year-old and you're getting ready to make the decision, this is what you want to be putting out on the table and talking through it with them. And then, it also, obviously this is to each their own, but it may make sense to have the kid take down some of the financial burden, right? So they've got skin in the game. If you say, hey, I'm willing to cover, 60% of the costs, I want you to take the other 40 or whatever the numbers may be, at least the kid knows that they've got skin in the game. And at the minimum, that should encourage them to bust their butt at school. So when they come out, they, ideally can get that job and start chipping away at, the debt sleeve that they said they were going to take, that they were going to handle. And if you're financially well off enough to cover the whole thing, great. And your child comes out, free and clear, and they can, start focusing on buying that first house or whatever. But it's not the worst idea in the world for those that are somewhere in the middle to put some of the liability on the child so that at the minimum, when they're sitting in that classroom on a Friday morning at 8 a.m., they can be focused on the important aspects of the academics. So, Nick, as it relates to, setting aside money and saving strategies, how are you recommending folks approach that?
Yeah, I think, if you've got some leeway, you have young children and are starting to get into planning that out, I think the 529 plan is kind of the cornerstone approach, right? You get tax-free growth, qualified withdrawals for any educational expenses, including housing and some living expenses that come with the education that you're receiving. There's no annual IRS contribution cap. There's gift tax exclusions for up to $19,000 per person. So this is a great way to, if your grandparents are trying to give money and contribute, or maybe doing some estate planning. We've seen that from some folks to be able to put large chunks of money in with a gift exemption to that. I think that's really been I think the staple of how folks are saving for kids' retirements, and I think it's a really valuable vehicle to utilize.
One of the nice things about the Roth too about the 529 is if a child ends up not using it, they don't go to school and they can't use that 529 for costs associated with education. After 15 years, the child can then, if they have not touched that money after 15 years, it's got to sit there dormant for 15 years within the 529. The 529 can then get rolled into a Roth for the beneficiary, who is the child. So I know there's always the hesitation, well, I don't want to put money aside because I don't know if my kid's going to go to school. So that's one thing you can fall back on. And then there's some other options out there too, which is an UTMA and an UGMA. And essentially what those bring to the table is less tax efficiency, but more flexibility. So if you say, hey, I think it's reasonably likely my child's not going to go to school, or I don't want to force them to go to school, I want them to have the option to be able to take this money and spend it on starting a business or, something else that may make sense for our family. That's a good option there. And then just best practices. If you start early, and start with small dollar amounts, automate it. You can set these things up to add $20 a week or, whatever, $50 a paycheck, whatever it may be. In all likelihood, you're not going to miss the money. You're not even going to know that it's gone. And you'll look back and you'll be happy 5, 10, 15 years from now that you've actually set aside a good deal of money. And probably the best way to do that, again, is the 529. So that's a good way to kind of get your family teed up is, again, just to set it up automated and allow it to, to build right off your paycheck. And you could do that on all the major, financial platforms.
Yeah, without a doubt. And too, if you have your eldest child doesn't use their entire 529 or decides not to go to college, you can also transfer that to other siblings and family members as well as or convert that to the Roth later on in time. So I think it's a very easy way to begin saving for your child's education. And again, there's some cool things that you can do from the estate planning side as well. with the older generation to help accelerate that savings plan as well. I think looking at that's a great roadmap, I think, for folks who have children or are preparing for this part of your life. But we've got a huge segment of the population and our clients, quite honestly, that have a lot of student loans out there. And I think people are always looking for the best strategy to try to tackle that debt. So let's kind of look at the overall health of the student loan market and kind of start breaking down those numbers a little bit, Brett.
Yeah. So as Nick mentioned, we have a fairly young client base, and it's very diverse across the country. So it's pretty representative of what's going on out there. So as folks come out of school, they may be making great money out of school, whether it's in medical field or business field or whatever field they may be in, but that doesn't mean that they don't have debt, right? So if we look at the entire landscape, there's $1.66 trillion in student loan debt out there, and it's at an average interest rate of approximately 7%. Okay, that is not the mortgage that we hear people talking about at 3%. That's 7%. That's almost stock market like returns, right? So that is a freight train that is running away from you if you don't address it head on. So what we're talking to folks about is setting up a plan and being able to approach it. There's a few different methods that are fairly popular, and I think Nick and Taylor brought those up on a prior podcast. So, Nick, as it relates to the snowball method and the avalanche method, you want to just remind folks what those are? I know you and Taylor talked about it a while ago. I was getting excited that ski season was here when you started bringing that up.
Yeah, no, it's there's two kind of general theories, I guess, in terms of debt repayment methods. The first one is the snowball method, which is you want to pay off your smallest balances first, regardless of interest rate. And there's a real psychological motivating factor that kind of fuels that method being pushed. And I can empathize with that to a degree. It's nice to see something cleared off the deck. It's nice to feel like that's a win. But from a financial standpoint, what they call the avalanche method is definitely financially, mathematically optimal, right? You're attacking the highest interest rate debt first and get that off the board. Compound interest doesn't really care about your feelings, unfortunately. So go after the one with the highest yield, the highest interest rate. And then some other repayment strategies. I mean, if you have the ability to bundle and refinance these things at a lower rate, student loans are at 6.5%, almost 7%, depending on where you get them at. It's being able to refinance at a lower rate definitely could help in consolidating those down. So I think those are kind of the two big debt repayment strategies that are kind of often talked about online. And I think, you want to make sure, just in summary of that, just take down the debt with the highest interest rate first, plain and simple, would be our advice there.
No doubt. And as folks come to us, generally speaking, if somebody didn't have student loans, we would talk to them about setting up, potentially 3 different investment buckets. Yep. And when you have student loans, essentially, what we would do is just call it a 4th bucket, right? So, and if we were to set up those, just lay those 4 buckets out, the first bucket, right, which you would prioritize first, is have an emergency fund, right? You want approximately 6 months worth of expenses. After that, I would put the student debt would be that bucket, right? Mm-hmm. And after that, you're looking at a brokerage account, which is potentially, intermediate to, longer term money. Maybe that's going to be the money that you buy your first house with. And then after that is your retirement bucket. And it doesn't mean that these are all, the priority of retirement should be, because it was listed last, should be thrown away, right? That you should handle it last. Essentially what we're talking about there is you got 4 different buckets. Look at what you're making, look at what your expenses are, look at how much money you can allocate to, look at how much money you can set aside on a month-to-month basis. Your priority 1 is the emergency account. Get the emergency account filled up. Once that's filled up, start throwing money at the student loans. You essentially shouldn't have a brokerage account, right? Because you have your emergency account. After you've knocked out that 7% interest rate, right, which would be an attractive return on your money, then we focus on the brokerage account. So that's, knocking that out is essentially putting a guaranteed 7% return in your pocket. And then, if your employer within your 401k or whatever retirement strategy your employer has, if there's some type of match there, you're going to want to prioritize that to get that match. So you want to start out with 4 buckets, and then hopefully you can knock the student loans out ASAP. And then you've got 3 buckets, right? And then you go to your emergency fund. You've got your brokerage account, which may be what you buy your first house with, and then you want to be maxing out your 401k if you can. That's pre-tax money. So Nick, throwing it back to you just to kind of wrap things up here.
Yeah, I think we can bring it home and kind of 3 big takeaways, I guess, is college can be worth it. We're big proponents of education, but we want to make sure that we're going about it in a smart way, that we're planning ahead of time, and we've got realistic expectations set as to what the return on that investment is and how much we should pay for it. We want to try to prioritize high return on investment paths. Take the right major, the right school, the right place, and we want to be proactive about debt. Whether you're saving for a future student or paying off the loans that you currently have, there's a way to go about that that's smart and can end up saving you a lot of money over the long term. So, Brett, any final thoughts before we close it up?
Yeah, I would just say, if I could ask, I could ask the listeners out there, do one thing. If you do one thing here, just write this stuff down on a piece of paper. Right? Write down what your goals are. Write down what your major is. Write down what you think it's going to cost. Write down what you think you're going to potentially make. Write it all down. Talk about it as a family. Okay? If there's somebody else that you really trust, within your social circle and your tight family circle there, chat with them about it. And then if you've done that, you've at least put your best foot forward, and then you can obviously make more calculated decisions than that. But if you don't ever write it down and it's never on paper, you've never actually looked at the numbers. You got to write this stuff down and then just chat about it as a family. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting topic, and we look forward to chat with you folks then. Have a great week.
Quick ask. If you're enjoying the show, hit the follow and drop a rating. It helps more folks find our podcast. Thanks so much.
The information discussed in this video is for educational purposes only and should not be considered investment, tax, or financial advice. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Always consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions. Past performance is not indicative of future results.